Okay, the textbook does a lousy lecture on voting and democracy and how that relates to economics. So obviously, I can't just give a lecture without going somewhere first. You can see the Acropolis Hill in the background there, I think. That's right, I'm in Athens. So this is the birthplace, really, of Western civilization and of the concept of democracy, one man, one vote, the polis, that is the public having the chance to vote rather than the king. And there was a huge debate between Socrates and some of these other folks about whether or not we wanted to be ruled by the people or whether we wanted to be ruled by the leaders, which was the learned men of the time. You know, when you're voting on building a ship, wouldn't you hire a bunch of shipbuilders? When you're voting on building a new house, wouldn't you want to use house construction people to decide that? You wouldn't want this just any old body voting on this if they have no particular skill and knowledge. And that, of course, can lead to the concept of a king being the all-skilled and learned. So, democracy. One man, one vote. One human, one vote, if you want to think of it that way. They talked a lot about that here. We had a very interesting presidential election in 2016 because most Americans did not want Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton to be their president if they were given those choices. If they're given the choice of those, they would say no. However, enough of the and probably only 30% of the Republicans even were interested in Donald Trump. There was more than 60% that were not interested in Donald Trump as their nominee. What happened was they couldn't solidify behind one candidate. So ultimately, Donald Trump became the Republican nominee. And the Democrats, they had a very close, contentious race between Hillary and Bernie, but at the end of the day, Hillary prevailed, despite her baggage. And if you know, there's the email scandal, there's the Seth Rich scandal, there's the Clinton Foundation scandal, there's so many things, Benghazi, so many weaknesses. Donald Trump, on the other hand, never held elective office, but there was Trump University, and certainly he had business relations in lots of other countries, which shouldn't disqualify him, but you know, there are some who argue that it could color his relationship. So both very flawed candidates. But when we vote here in America, we vote for an electoral college, which there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't go with the popular vote. Many great reasons. The 51% becomes the tyranny of the majority, and we don't want that. So we have a representative democracy. We have a republic where we elect people who then go and vote. One of the great things about the Electoral College is it limits the amount of fraud that would happen because you're only affecting your state's electoral outcomes. So there's no incentive to have an additional 1 million or 2 million votes in one state if you know that at the end of the day you're still gonna win that state. So it limits that impact. The other thing is the big reason that they chose this is they didn't want 1 or 2 cities influencing the whole thing, just like we have in New York. Basically, if you can't carry New York City, you're not going to be governor. That's the way that works. New York City is that huge compared to the rest of the state, so it dominates state politics, even if you live in upstate in a rural community. So the idea of the Electoral College was to spread around so that the person winning needed to have votes from all areas, both urban and rural. So it prevented the domination of the rural by the urban. So that was the purpose of it. And it works great. Unless you were a supporter of Al Gore and Hillary Clinton, in which case then you might say, oh, it doesn't work. The popular vote isn't what won. But if you were campaigning for popular vote, things would have been very different. Donald Trump didn't go to New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco very often, or Washington, D.C. There was no point in that. He'd already lost those. The irony, of course, of the 2016 election was that Hillary Clinton didn't go to Wisconsin. I think at the very end, the day before the election, she went to Michigan for the first time. Ohio. Those are places that Pennsylvania, she didn't spend much time in. And those were the Rust Belt that needed to hold for her, and Donald Trump needed to break through. Well, Donald Trump went there. Hillary Clinton did not. So his message resonated with those people for whatever reason. And so his broad support across the country, if you look at the map, county by county, it was a huge victory for him. But if you look at the popular vote, it wasn't, because her success with voters was limited largely to 3 or 4 major urban centers, and that was it. If you pull away New York and Los Angeles, she loses by millions of votes. So in the popular vote. So, but the game was not played by popular vote. It was voted by Electoral College, and that's what you know. That's the game you're playing. That's the game. That was the number 270. Everybody said in advance of the election, Donald Trump didn't have a path to 270. But the truth of the matter was, they needed the state-by-state polling to figure that out. And I actually, everybody keeps talking about how shocked they were that Hillary lost and Donald Trump won. But there was a computer algorithm that I was reading about on October 28th, which was before the James Comey reprise of his role. But in October 28th, the computer model was predicting a Trump victory. The computer model that had predicted successfully the last 3 or 4 presidential elections. So the fact is, it was never a lock for her, and that's just the way it works. But whether or not we get our best outcome, that's a huge debate in terms of democracy. It's not. Winston Churchill said democracy is the best form of government only when compared to all others, or something to that effect. It's got many vices. It's not perfect at all, but it sure beats totalitarianism. So just to finish my conversation about democracy, of course, before I leave Athens here, democracy isn't just about presidential elections or the elections in general. It's also about the laws that were made and the deals that were made, the politics that comes with it. This is some of the stuff that democracy has a real problem with. I think the textbook uses the term log rolling when oftentimes one person says, hey, if you vote for my project, I'll vote for your project, or we'll add a whole bunch of things. When you go back to Obamacare, they had, I forget, the Louisiana Purchase they were calling it, when they basically bought the vote of the Louisiana senator. And the other thing is the stimulus bills that go on. A lot of times they'll call them pork barrel politics, and so the stimulus of 2009 was named the Porkulus bill, because what it was oftentimes gravy train money for various congressional districts or senatorial areas. And so it wasn't that it was a good bill, but it was just good for, in order to get the votes, they needed to give away a lot of gifts, and that's what ends up happening. So one of the ways they can resolve some of that the pork barrel spending and pork barrel politics is with the line item veto. Many governors have a line item veto, but the President of the United States does not, which means that in terms for some state governors, they can have a bill passed, and so maybe they get somebody to agree to it because he's getting something for his district, so he finally agrees to go along with the budget, whatever. But the governor then ultimately has the opportunity to pull that away, and naturally they're more likely to strip it away from members of the other party. But the given flow of politics is they may not even do that, because they know they need to count on that opposite member in a future vote.